Another week, another series of events that were, well, to put it quite simply, bat beep crazy. I'd like to start by congratulating the Democrats for giving us the certainty we as human beings crave. Clearly, stupidly, there was still a tiny part of me that thought that maybe, just maybe, they might have learnt something, albeit tiny, after having their handed to them at the last election. But at this week's DNC elections, they made it clear beyond any doubt that they have not.
In this round, so I'm going to, I have a show of hands. How many of you believe that racism and misogyny played a role in Vice President Harris's defeat? Okay. So that's good. You all passed.
And if that wasn't bad enough, the bloke on stage signalling for those one or two who kept their arms down quite sensibly to join the masses in raising them, well, he is their new leader. I mean, they say you couldn't make this stuff up, but really you could. You just don't need to. They exhibit their stupidity voluntarily and to the masses. And just for the record, as a foreign observer to the election build-up, result, and let's be honest, the 4 years of chaos that preceded it, there's much simpler explanation as to why you lost. A summary, if I may. Your borders sucked, your crime rate sucked, your cost of living sucked, your foreign policy or lack thereof sucked, your common sense or lack thereof sucked, and your leaders, well, sorry to be repetitive here, they sucked too.
But in America, we resolve our differences at the battle box.
I grew up understanding the children of the community are the children of the community.
The only thing age does is help you with it.
We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
The total ban on the total initiative relative to what person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID. Excuse me, with dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president.
I do believe that we should have rightly believed, but we certainly believe that certain issues are just settled. Certain issues are just settled.
Clearly we're not.
No, that's right, and that's why I do believe that we are living, sadly, in real unsettled time. For us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present.
I mean, if the country wasn't in complete disarray leading up to the election, then maybe Americans might have had the luxury of choosing a candidate based on sex and race, but no one, frankly, had the time or capacity to. They were a little preoccupied supporting their daughters in the unenviable task of simultaneously trying to avoid boys in their change rooms whilst asking nicely if they could please pass them a tampon from theirs. In other words, if your people were doing well, then they might have been able to buy more into your BS woke ideology and vote based on the things you think matter, like sex and race. But given how badly you screwed their country up, the nail in your own coffin was, for the most part, self-inflicted. You hammered that baby in all by yourself. Oh, and credit too, where it's due. You were also up against this bloke. And despite all of your attempts to destroy him, you failed. What a double whammy. Not only did you lose badly, but to the bloke who represents every single thing it is you seem to hate. And I'm starting to think that might be not just him or the American people, but yourselves as well. Tucker Carlson has used a sit-down with Piers to accuse, well, let's be honest, it's not really a strong enough word, to state with complete conviction that Israel deliberately kills women and children.
If you're intentionally killing civilians, you probably shouldn't beat your chest and brag about it. You know, maybe you could make the case,
with that.
Maybe you make the case that we had to do it or whatever, but you should.
I agree.
You should weep, and that's evil, and you should just say it's evil. And I know it's really threatening to.
Is it evil?
Ben Shapiro to say that or whatever. But
is it evil
to kill civilians on purpose? Yeah, it is. I think it is.
Really?
Kids and children. Well, how is it not actually?
In a war?
well, you can call it whatever you want. How is it right to kill women and children?
I didn't say, well, because I think there is a moral right behind you if you are literally...
To kill women and children? Really?
If there's a world war that threatens if it threatens the entire world, yes.
Some people killed your kids, like your 8-year-old? Like,
well,
how
your
is
own
that
children,
morally justifiable?
Well, because actually you have to, by your criteria...
It's disgusting.
Okay, so no war is morally justified.
I mean, I think it's pretty hard to justify. I mean, yeah, I'm
Any
sure,
war.
A pure defensive action, sure. But all I'm saying, look, it's all ugly. It's all hard to stomach. I've actually seen some of it up close. It's super ugly.
You can say that. You can say you hate it.
May I finish?
The fact you quibble with it being morally justified.
To intentionally kill non-combatants, women and children, I think we can say that's wrong. In fact, I thought that was the thing we were fighting against.
I mean, I'm used to having to explain the following to useful idiots, but Tucker isn't one of them. I didn't think. I'd long admired him as a broadcaster, someone I looked up to. The Russia stuff, well, lost me a fair bit, to be honest with you, but this, well, it's just getting worse. Tucker, like so many in this space, the apparent care you have for innocent women and children is spot on, and I share it fully. Most people do. I'd love for it to extend to all in that category who suffer, including those in Ukraine and Israel, but I digress. You're right when you say it's evil to intentionally kill them. Of course it is. You're also correct when you make the point that no one should ever beat their chest or brag about it. I'm just completely baffled as to how these factual and morally righteous statements you make are directed towards the victims of this war and not the perpetrators. You must be confused, so let me help. When Hamas invaded Israel on October 7, they intentionally killed thousands of innocent people, including women and children. You know, the ones you speak of. They took hundreds they didn't murder hostage. They also, just for good measure, promised publicly to repeat the atrocities over and over and over again. So when you talk about bragging and chest beating, it's exactly what these terrorists did. They filmed their murderous rampage and made sure the entire world saw it. They then celebrated it, not just in Gaza, but all over the world. In fact, just recently, their leader called it a day of pride for the Palestinians. So just to summarise, they did the following. This is Hamas. Intentional killing of women and children, tick. Chest beating, tick. Bragging, tick. So all the things you say people shouldn't. In contrast, Israel, the victims of October 7, were faced with the following situation. Terrorists who had just demonstrated their capability and willingness to, again, intentionally, there's that word, kill thousands. Their public commitment to continue doing so, and their capture of hundreds of innocent men, women and children they dragged back into Gaza. So Israel has been forced, intentionally, that word again, into this position. It must protect its people against an enemy that has somehow inconceivably convinced the masses that despite its barbaric murderous spree, it's the actual victim. It'd be a hard enough conundrum for any country with the majority of the decent world on side, let alone the unfathomable position many alleged allies have taken in the aftermath of the greatest loss of life suffered by the Jewish since the Holocaust. So what were they to do, Tucker? Seriously, I'd love to know. The only way to protect innocent people from terrorists who promise to keep killing them is to eliminate said terrorists. That could have been done through their own surrender. The hostages released, the weapons laid down, and the killers arrested. No such chance, of course. They're evil. This conflict that followed was part of their plan all along. Israel had to act. They had no choice. They gave warnings, verbal, text messages, leaflets urging civilians to get out. They even told their enemies their next move, to do what they could to minimise collateral damage. But when that enemy craves death and destruction in the same way we all crave life and peace, then they will sacrifice their people to achieve their outcome. That's how Hamas operate. The horrific use of human shields and then the weaponization of it. Israel has not bragged or beaten its chest over the killing of women and children in Gaza. The complete opposite. They've had to apologise and beg for just the sheer acceptance every other country in the world would automatically get during war. A war, mind you, they did not start and have begged to be allowed to finish since it began. Every death of any innocent human being is a tragedy, especially women and children. But you must assign blame where it belongs. And that is at the feet of Hamas and all those who support them. So please, continue to condemn the intentional killing of women and children. We all must. But don't confuse who the perpetrators of it are. If you do, you empower these evil actors to continue using what's now become a tried and tested method by not only accepting the lies and the propaganda, but by using your enormous platform to promote it. And speaking of, congratulations to new Sec Defence Pete Hegseth, who has recognised that maybe, just maybe, the archaic, declining mainstream media types who have enjoyed the luxury of a suite at the Pentagon should start to share the privilege. And to be honest, whilst those given their marching orders are clearly pretty miserable about it, I'm a look on the bright side kind of girl. For instance, NBC. The time they will now have to spend commuting to and from Defence HQ on a bus or maybe the metro can be spent freshening up their skills, like, say, the difference between a hostage and a prisoner, a mistake they made just this week. Again, I revert to this really basic, simple test one can do inside one's mind before penning such a piece. A 9-month-old baby held against his will, like Kafir Bibas, is a hostage. The killer of a 9-month-old baby, like the recently released Yasser Abu Bakr, is a prisoner. That should help your team of alleged truth seekers out. And look, whilst you're undertaking this little refresher course, maybe you could dial in your mates at the BBC, who called the Israeli hostages released this week prisoners. They apologised, but let's be honest, they are repeat offenders.
And earlier today on BBC News, we reported on the release of the names of those 3 Israeli hostages who are due to be freed tomorrow. At one point in our coverage, we mistakenly called the hostages prisoners, and we would like to apologise for that error.
But clearly, in good company. They'd both no doubt get along really well with the Red Cross, who reportedly this week expressed outrage at the treatment of the Palestinian prisoners. I kid you not, outrage, because, and God forbid, they were handcuffed with their arms raised wearing a bracelet that said, "Eternity does not forget." Thank goodness for the Red Cross. Seriously, where would humanity be without them? The deep care and concern they show for the terrorist murderers is so noble. If only they had a tiny bit of compassion left for the innocent women who were made to battle this riotous mob upon their release. But then again, given they didn't give a tinker's cuss about them whilst they were in captivity for nearly 500 days, highly unlikely they were going to change their tune upon their release. Also, come on, they're part of the Hamas Broadway show. Stars in the making, no doubt, playing the part to perfection. All their friends in Hollywood must be super proud. Again, we, on the right side of history, all know how much of a disgrace the Red Cross are. I'm just worried that with such blatant acts of public hypocrisy and stupidity, the rest of the world might cotton on soon too. And that's going to be really bad for business. Speaking of bad for business, and yes, I love a segue, and I'm spoilt for choice in this space, aren't I? Columbia University has no credibility left. Zilch, zero, nada whatsoever. But it's done a mighty good job of trying to continue to destroy it regardless. Remember this woman.
Why should the university be obligated to provide food to people who've taken over a building?
Well, first of all, we're saying that they're obligated to provide food to students who pay for a meal plan here.
But you mentioned that there was a request that food and water be brought in, unless I misunderstood.
To allow it to be brought in. I mean, well, I guess it's ultimately a question of what kind of community and obligation Columbia feels it has to its students. Do you want students to die of dehydration and starvation or get severely ill, even if they disagree with you? If the answer is no, then you should allow basic, I mean, it's crazy to say because we're on an Ivy League campus, but this is like basic humanitarian aid we're asking for. Like, could people please have a glass of water?
But they did put themselves in that very deliberately in that situation and in that position. So it seems like you're sort of saying, we want to be revolutionaries, we want to take over this building, now would you please bring us food and water? And
nobody's asking them to bring anything. We're asking them to not violently stop us from bringing in basic humanitarian aid.
They're stopping the delivery of food?
We are looking for a commitment from them that they will not stop it
but
violently.
They haven't stopped it yet.
I don't know to what extent it has been attempted, but we're looking for a commitment.
And the Grubhub.
Well, this is a rather bizarre career progression thing they have going on there. So, you can lead a dangerous mob, get arrested, then suspended, then, if you're really lucky, you get promoted. Joanna King-Slutsky is now a teacher at Columbia. And guess what class she's in charge of? Contemporary Western Civilization, a mandatory course for all undergrads. How special. Because if the young of the Western world aren't already screwed up enough in the head after a decade of woke school and TikTok algorithms, they'll be sure to get an extra lethal dose of dumb from Miss Slutsky at college. Way to shape the minds of our future leaders, huh? And yes, here I go again, speaking of future leaders. This speaker at Middlebury College was an emotional wreck as she unleashed on all those unlucky enough to be there in person.
Ways that Middlebury fails its students make this sobering truth abundantly clear. This is heartbreaking. If there's anything you hear of what I'm saying, let it be this. When our hearts break, let them break open like pomegranates and burst with seeds that can take root. We are literally graduating the same month a fascist has taken office. As global citizens, we cannot just focus on the violence of this campus or in the United States. We must extend our moral imagination to every life on this planet.
Okay, well, for starters, the seed thing is just weird, but the moral imagination, what a refreshing outburst of honesty. Most of what you say, you're right, is imagination. It's not real. You see, the evil you imagine already exists, yes, but it ain't in the form of Donald Trump. It's a lot closer to resembling the mob you clearly align yourself with. And if I'm being completely honest back at you, the prospect of anyone taking anything you say seriously when you wear a rainbow pride scarf intertwined with one commonly associated with a terrorist organisation who takes pride in killing the LGBTQ community is low. In fact, I'd hazard a guess at non-existent. So when your parents put in for a refund for your tuition fees, and if they don't, they should, I take a moment to reflect on who the real failure here is. And I suspect it's a lot closer to home than those you direct your outrage at from a safe stage far, far away from those actually fighting real evil at the coalface and paying with their lives, rather than just their dignity. Both a high price, but the one you pay is the currency of cowards. Theirs, the cost of courage. And history will document and remember both. And future generations will see clearly what you abysmally and unforgivably failed to. Just like they'll have to look at headlines like this and shudder. Is Israel weaponizing the tragic deaths of the Bibas children? The Guardian with how Israel has made trauma a weapon of war. And this real cherry on top. Israel must stop weaponizing the Holocaust. It is actually, and I don't even have words, but beyond belief, despite how low my bar is set now. It almost doesn't even warrant a response, but I'll give it a really quick and simple one. So those who are stupid enough to write and project this stuff might just understand even a tiny bit. Unlikely, I know, but here goes. Your evil knows no bounds. The Bibas children are still missing. So any mention of them is not for propaganda purposes. It's to try and desperately get them home. Trauma, absolutely. Try living next to terrorists who regularly butcher you. And the Holocaust, yep, it happened and millions died. So what we are seeing today is far too close to home for many who lived through it back then. So if you don't like the existence of any of the above, I've got a really good solution for you. Stop killing them, stop kidnapping them, stop traumatizing them. Then they'll have nothing to weaponize, as you call it, against you. It's not rocket science, you dangerous fools. Take away their material. I'm sure they'd much prefer that than the current hell on earth they live daily. And then you don't have to be made to feel bad for the atrocities you clearly condone. Simple, I know, makes far too much sense, so I will not hold my breath. And just a little shout out to my home, Australia, who continues to make headlines in the worst possible way. More racist graffiti, more anti-Semitic hate, more thwarted mass casualty events. Just more of the same attacks on a minority group that would not be tolerated for even a millisecond if they were aimed at anyone other than the Jews. Women were egged in the eastern suburbs of Sydney on the weekend because they were apparently identifiably Jewish. I mean, where is the outrage? The human rights advocates, the feminists, the freedom fighters, who will take an often innocuous comment that meant no harm and use it to destroy lives if they can somehow mould it into something seemingly offensive. Yet when there is no doubt, no grey, no need for interpretation, when the racism and hate is abundantly clear, they disappear. Afraid their newfound fans might desert them if they stand up and call it out. The farcical frauds are everywhere in this country. We love to punch above our weight globally, in sport and science and plenty else, acting as well. But this kind of excelling is shameful beyond belief. But the reckoning will come. It always does. It just might take a while. And the world will eventually wake up and see you all for who and what you are. There'll be no coming back. No subtle shift of position back to the right side. You're your own worst enemy, you see. What got you here in the first place, the attention and accolades from evil that became your lifeblood, your addiction, your kryptonite, will be ultimately what destroys you, because it's all there in the public arena forever, for everyone to see. There's no hiding because you permanently etched your stupidity into the history books. And for those too, who won't have a word recorded either way, know that will count as your legacy too. Your silence will be deafening, just like the masses who stood by and said nothing over 80 years ago. We all have a voice. Some might reach more than others, but if you aren't using yours, no matter how big or small, to fight for what's right, then you are complicit in this. Make no mistake about it. Standing up for Jewish people is standing up for women and children in Gaza. They are both being killed by the same thing. A shared enemy that hates everything we believe in: life, freedom, democracy, peace. They worship death and destruction, and they use terror to achieve it. And when future generations sit down and read about this time and try to understand how their ancestors could have possibly chosen to side with the latter, with the terrorists, it will be reminiscent of how incomprehensible most of us found it as kids to understand how the Nazis did what they did, and millions stood by and let them. There's still time to right the wrongs, to stand for women and children in Gaza, end their cycle of horror, that too of their neighbours in Israel, and innocent people everywhere who are next on the list. No one will be spared. And to do that, we must all universally condemn the actual terrorists who are killing them, not the democracy, however imperfect it may be, trying to destroy them disgracefully alone on our behalf.